In our previous video, we saw that we were given a ledger account. We were given different ledger accounts. We calculated the balances and then we created a trial balance. Though this might not always be the case. Sometimes we might be given a trial balance directly, but it might have errors. Thus we need to know how to correct the errors. So in this video and the next one, we'll be seeing how to correct errors in our trial balance and how to avoid them. So over here I've been given a trial balance, and let's add up our debit side and credit side and see whether they match or not. So we have 500, let's take a colorful marker. Let's add up all our debit sides first. So we have 500 plus 50, 550, plus 40, 590, 590 plus 150, that gives us 740, 740 plus 50, that gives us 790. So we'll write 790 over here. Now let's add up all our credit sides. On our credit sides, we have 40 plus 70, 110. 110 plus 80, 190. 190 plus 30, 220. 220 plus 780, 1000. 1000 plus 10, 1010. Oh no, this means our trial balance is not matching. Our debit side and credit side are not equal to each other. So there might be some kinds of errors. So over here in this trial balance, what I've done is I've mixed up my debit side entries and my credit side entries with each other. From which I mean, if a particular account should have a debit side entry, I might have put it on my credit side. So to rectify this kind of error, we need to know which classes of accounts have a debit balance and which classes of account have a credit balance, so we can correct our trial balance. So first let's understand that. Over here I made a note of all the different classes of accounts and whether they have a debit or a credit balance. On the left hand side I have assets, expenses, drawings, purchases and sales returns. All these kinds of ledgers have a debit balance. On the other hand, all of these kinds of ledgers, liabilities, incomes, capital, sales and purchase returns, have a credit balance. Okay, and if they have a balance on the other side, that means we have not added them correctly to our trial balance. So now let's look at our trial balance with this new known information and see what errors our trial balance might have. So we are back to our flawed trial balance, and let's correct all the errors in it. The first error over here is that we have not given the title to our trial balance. So let's start by writing the title. Trial balance at 31st January 2019. Cool, so we have written a title for a trial balance. So now we are done with the first step. Now let's check out each of our accounts and see whether we have added the balance on the correct side or not. Our bank account. So let's select a few different markers. Perfect. So a bank account is an asset, and that's why it's on the debit side. That's correct. Our trade receivables account over here is also an asset. So it should be on the debit side, but it's not. It's on the credit side. That means that is wrong. So we'll put the credit balance of 40 on the debit side and slash this out. Let's see rent. Rent is an expense. That's why it should be on the debit side. So it's correct. Then we have inventory. Inventory is an asset. That's why it should be on the debit side. So that is correct. Equipment is also an asset. So it should be on the debit side, but it is not. So let's put it on the debit side. $70 debited and this slashed out. Then we have trade payables. Trade payables is a liability. It should be credited, and it is credited, so it is correct. Wages. Wages is an expense and should be debited. That's why it's also in the correct position. Dividends. Dividends is a form of income which is credited. and it is on the credit side, therefore it is correct. Electricity expense is a type of expense, so it should be debited and it is on the debit side, thus it is correct. Capital should be credited, and discount received, which is also a form of income, should also be credited. That's why it's correct. So now with the corrections in our trial balance, let's add up all our values of debit side and then add all our values on the credit side and see if our trial balance balances. So we have 500 plus 40, 540, 540 plus 50, 590, plus 40, 630, plus 70, 700, 700 plus 150, 850, plus 50, 900. So we have 900 as our total for our debit side. Now let's add up all our credit side balances. We will not take 40 and 70 because they were wrong, and we'll start with 80 plus 30, 110, plus 780, which is 990, plus 10, which is 890, plus 10, which adds up to 900. So perfect. Now our debit side and credit side balance each other and are equal to each other. That means our trial balance has balance and it has arithmetical accuracy. Great. Apart from this error of we putting our accounts on the wrong side, debit and credit, there are other kinds of errors too. So let's check them out. So firstly, we have the error of addition within the trial balance. So let's check that out. What do we mean by that? For example, I added my 80 and 30 in my trial balance as 140 instead of 110. So this is an error of addition in my trial balance. Then another kind of error is again an error of addition but within the ledger accounts. So over here in my bank account, let's take that as an example. When I had 1000 plus 70 plus 5, I added it to 1570, which is incorrect. It should have been 1075. So that is an error of addition in our ledger accounts. Let's move on to the third kind of error. This is when you add different figures on the credit and debit during your double entries. For example, over here, when you took a bank loan of $67, you put it as $70 in your bank account. So you put the debit side as 70, but the credit side as 67. This means your trial balance won't balance because you added different amounts. So this is a third kind of error. Another error, which is a single entry error, which means that instead of following the double entry system and adding two entries, you forget to add one of them and only add one of the entries. For example, over here in my bank loan account, I added $70 of bank loan to my bank loan account, but I forgot to debit the same amount in my bank account. This will lead to my balance not matching, which is another type of error. Single entry instead of double. Another kind of error is when the transactions entered are twice on the same side of the ledger. That means that instead of adding a debit entry and a credit entry, you make a double debit entry or a double credit entry and forget the other, or you just make two entries instead of the one which you should have made. So over here, you can see in the bank loan account, I made a credit entry twice instead of just adding it once, which would have been correct. So this can again lead to a trial balance not balancing because your credit side is overestimated.